My name is Kier-La Janisse, and the film that I wanted to talk about today is Robert Freeman's film, The Touchables. And the reason I wanted to commentate on this film in particular is that it's among the select few people who have actually seen it. It's often cited as an example of a trailer that's much better than the movie itself. And even the writer, Ian Le Frenay, has called it the worst film ever made, and told me that even though he wrote it, he had no idea what it was about. And so, this is not necessarily a view that I agree with for reasons that I'll get into, but the trailer is pretty remarkable and it's definitely one of my favorite movie trailers, period. So let's take a look. So the director, Robert Freeman, was offered an opportunity to make a film for 20th Century Fox. And at the time, he was a hot property, having done many Beatles covers and worked frequently in commercials. And one of the people he worked with on those commercials was David Cammell, who owned a production company. And David, of course, was the brother of Donald Cammell, who would go on to co-create Performance and a handful of often ill-fated projects, including the singular serial killer film White of the Eye. By David Cammell's account, Robert Freeman had a title, he had the idea of a zany British romp starring 4 girls, and he had the wrestler, Ricky Starr, who was very well known in the UK for being a flamboyant ballet dancer turned wrestler. David Cammell threw in the idea of a kidnapping, with the roles reversed so that the 4 liberated and domineering dolly birds would steal away a handsome young bloke to have their way with him in a giant geodesic dome, which operates as their rural playpen. Now, this dome is a rather conspicuous hideout. There's no attempt to explain it, nor the girls' apparent disposable wealth in the film. But the dome was a set piece that the visually motivated Robert Freeman had wanted from the beginning. And so while the film exists almost entirely in a fantasy world, the making of the film seems to exist in a fantasy world as well. And the dome, which was designed and built for the film, kept bursting and deflating every time there was wind, and it had to be replaced 4 times during production. But going back to the film's convoluted authorship, David Cammell wrote a treatment, passed it on to his brother Donald Cammell, who at that time was largely known as a society painter, like a portrait painter, and Freeman purportedly rejected Donald Cammell's script. And so production on The Touchables began without an approved script. And so enter Ian Le Frenay, who'd recently had a hit with the Michael Winner film, The Jokers, and he was never shown Donald Cammell's script. In fact, when I spoke to him, he didn't even know that Donald Cammell had ever written a script, although David and Donald Cammell are both credited on screen with the story. So Ian Le Frenay set about stitching a script together based on a combination of the treatment and Robert Freeman's highly fetishistic visual set pieces, but admittedly many things in the film are left unexplained. What's interesting about these recollections, namely that Donald Cammell's script never ended up on screen, is that The Touchables shares a very clear lineage with Performance. Not only the centrality of the sequestered pop star, the mid-60s was when Donald Cammell first met Brian Jones and Anita Pallenberg and started to become really obsessed with the pop star life. But even the underworld gangsters in the film would seem to draw on Cammell's well-publicized connection to gangster twins, the Krays. And though it has an obvious layer of repressed anger bubbling beneath the surface, Judy Huxtable's character in particular is quite literally trigger-happy. The film has all the accoutrements of a swinging London film. And so I feel like there's really a lot to unpack with The Touchables, and it's kind of at this cultural and social nexus. And given that Robert Freeman later went on to make another film I absolutely adore called Secret World in 1970, I believe, it's a shame that he didn't make more films. And The Touchables, to my knowledge, has never been released on home video, so it is pretty difficult to track down. But if you can, it is totally worth seeking out.